200 Apache warriors sat silent in the dust outside Elias Whitaker's ranch, war paint fresh, arrows ready, and every eye fixed on his front door. But 12 hours earlier, all he'd done was give a starving boy half a piece of bread. The wind in Dustwater Valley didn't whisper. It scraped, it tore, it howled like a dying animal across dry earth and brittle wood. And Elias Whitaker had grown used to it. He was 34, too young to be called old, but too worn to be called young. He'd survived war, survived betrayal, survived long enough to learn that peace wasn't something the world gave you. It was something you carved out, acre by acre, nail by nail. And here, in this forgotten slice of Arizona, surrounded by dust and silence, he'd carved his peace. Whisper Rock Ranch wasn't much. A patch of stubborn cattle, a crooked fence line, a cabin that creaked at night like it had secrets to confess. But it was his. And out here, alone, he could breathe. Elias swung the hammer with practiced rhythm, driving in another nail on the southern fence. Sweat rolled down his back, soaking the collar of his faded shirt. Overhead, a hawk circled once, then vanished. Something felt off. The horses in the corral stood still. Not calm, still. The kind of still that animals only show when they know something's coming. Elias looked up. The air was too quiet. No wind, no bugs, no birds. He knew that kind of silence. It was the same kind that settled in just before an ambush, or a funeral. He holstered his hammer, unlatched the old revolver from his belt, and started walking toward the dry creek. He didn't know it yet, but he was walking straight into the moment that would rewrite the rest of his life. The moment that would pit him between 200 warriors and a child with whip scars on his back. And it all began with one bite of bread, offered not out of strategy or debt, but out of something far more dangerous: kindness. What do you think Elias saw in that boy that made him risk everything for a piece of bread? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The dry creek bed wound through the brush like a scar, its stones sun-bleached and silent. Elias moved slow, steps deliberate, eyes scanning the terrain the way a man scans for snakes, expecting one, hoping not to find it. Then he saw it, a shadow, crouched behind a sandstone boulder no bigger than a horse's flank. Still, too still to be animal, too silent to be safe. He raised the revolver, thumb on the hammer. "Don't move," he said quietly. Nothing. He stepped closer, boots crunching gravel, heart ticking steady like a clock about to break. Then the shadow shifted. A boy. Skin sunburnt, cheek hollow, eyes too wide for that small face. No older than 8. Shirt torn, knees scraped, lips cracked and flaking. The boy stared at him, not with fear, not even defiance, just surrender. And something else, something worse: hunger. The kind of hunger that made people dig through dirt looking for roots. Elias followed the boy's gaze and saw the bare patch of dry earth he'd been clawing at, the crushed tuber he hadn't even managed to pull whole. The boy didn't speak, didn't beg, just stayed crouched, ribs showing through fabric, eyes dull like he'd already left his body behind. Elias slowly holstered his gun. He reached into his satchel and pulled out his lunch, just a hunk of cornbread, half hard from yesterday, meant to get him through till sundown. He walked to the nearest flat rock, set it down gently, and backed away 3 paces. The boy didn't blink. For a moment, Elias thought he might be dead. Then, like a shadow uncoiling, the boy darted forward. He grabbed the bread with both hands and bit so hard his teeth cracked against it. He didn't chew. He devoured. Tears ran down his cheeks, carving clean lines through dirt and blood. Elias swallowed hard. Not because of pity, but because something inside him recognized that desperation. Not from memory, from instinct. No child should eat like that. He knelt slowly. "You got a name?" he asked. Silence. Elias tried again. "You hurt?" The boy said nothing, just kept chewing. That's when Elias saw the back of him. The shirt had fallen open. Across the boy's skin were angry welts, long, raised, and fresh, the kind made not from punishment, but ceremony. Each one spaced evenly, deliberate, ritualistic. Elias looked away, not out of disgust, but because he didn't want the boy to think he was counting. He stood, offered a hand. "Come on then," he said, "we'll get you washed up." The boy didn't move, just stared at him like he was a ghost. Elias didn't press. He turned and started walking back to the ranch. After 5 paces, he heard footsteps behind him. By the time the sun dipped low and the wind returned to whisper through the fence posts, Elias had a stranger under his roof. He didn't know where the boy came from or what kind of trouble he might bring, but he knew this. He'd given away the last piece of bread he had, and something far harder to come by: his distance. The boy didn't speak a word the whole walk back, not when Elias led him through the gate, not when he offered a cup of water, not even when the cabin door creaked shut behind him, swallowing the light of the dying sun. Inside, the air was cooler, smelled like wood smoke and saddle leather. Elias stirred the pot hanging over the small stove, pinto beans and chili, cooked slow all day. He added a wedge of cornbread from his emergency stash, broke it in half, handed one to the boy. Still nothing. No name, no questions, just silence and eating. Elias didn't push. He'd seen enough soldiers come back from things they couldn't explain, let alone speak about. After supper, he poured warm water into a metal basin and set it by the hearth. "You wash up if you want," he said. The boy stared at it like it might bite him. Then, wordlessly, he stripped off his torn shirt. That's when Elias saw the full map of pain, his back a canvas of red, swollen welts, some so deep they'd bled through days of sweat and dust. But what caught Elias wasn't the brutality, it was the pattern. Each strike perfectly spaced, some curved slightly, each welt intentional, not punishment, ceremony. He'd seen similar marks in an old Apache prisoner once. The army captain had called it the whipping of spirits. Elias hadn't believed it then. He wasn't sure he did now. But something about the boy's scars, they didn't scream discipline. They whispered ritual. Later that night, Elias gave the boy a blanket and the cot by the fire. He himself sat on the porch, pipe in hand, eyes toward the ridge. Coyotes howled somewhere far off. The stars blinked down like watchful ancestors. He didn't know if the boy had family, enemies, or both. Didn't know if someone was already tracking him, or if the boy was the one danger was running from. But Elias Whitaker had lived long enough to read signs. And the wind tonight lied. It whispered peace. But in the marrow of his bones, Elias knew trouble was coming, and it had already crossed his fence line. If you were Elias facing 200 silent warriors, would you be willing to fight like in the previous video? Let me know in the comments, because his next decision will decide the fate of the farm and the boy in it. The sun hadn't cleared the ridge yet when Elias stirred from sleep. The boy, Koa, though he didn't yet know that name, was still curled on the cot, breathing light and fast like someone dreaming of running. The cabin was quiet, too quiet. No coyote calls, no wind through the shutters, no creak of the old rafters. Elias sat up, boots thudding against the plank floor. He opened the cabin door and froze. Everything was wrong. The horses were pressed tight in the corner of the corral, eyes wide, ears flat, nostrils flaring. Chickens hadn't left the coop. The dog, Old Ranger, stood on the porch with his tail tucked, hackles raised, letting out the kind of low growl reserved for things that didn't belong in this world. Elias followed the dog's gaze. Out past the field, just beyond the far fence line, where the mesquite trees began to thin. They were there. Warriors. A line of them. No, a wall. They sat astride painted horses, faces still as carved stone, bodies draped in buckskin, war paint fresh across their cheeks like thunderclouds and blood. 100, 200, maybe more, forming a perfect half circle around the ranch. No sound, no movement, just the wind lifting dust around hooves that did not shift. Elias stepped down from the porch, slowly. He counted. 5 steps to the well, another 10 to the fence. He didn't go past it. His boots crunched softly in the dirt. None of the warriors spoke. None raised a weapon, but their eyes followed him like stars tracking prey across the night. He turned slowly, gaze sweeping the line. There were no scouts, no foragers, no chiefs calling warnings. This wasn't a raid. This was judgment, and Whisper Rock Ranch had become the courthouse. Elias stood with one boot resting on the edge of the porch step, eyes scanning the ridgeline, then the horizon. Still nothing moved, no hand twitched, no horse snorted. Even the birds had stopped. This wasn't a scouting party, wasn't a war band caught on the move. This was the nation. The Apache had come in full. He could see elders, youths with fresh paint, veterans with feathers braided into their hair, women with bows slung over shoulders, faces like stone. From the way they sat, silent, patient, ready, he could tell. They weren't here to warn. They were here to witness. Elias felt the weight of it settle on his shoulders like a snowfall made of lead. Not a single man had spoken, but the message was louder than thunder. The boy inside, whoever he was, meant something far beyond Elias's understanding. And whatever line had been crossed, it had been sacred. He turned, opened the door behind him. The boy hadn't moved, still sleepin', fists curled against his chest like he was bracin' for a blow. Elias didn't wake him. He stepped back out, lit a match against the porch post, and held it to his old kettle pot. Set it to boil. The water would take time, and time was the only thing he had left. He looked again across the field, at the faces waiting. One of the horses shifted its weight, a creak of leather, the faint jingle of metal, but no words, not even a blink. He picked up a tin cup, filled it with what coffee he had left, and stood facing them. Took a long sip. Then, softly, under his breath, to no one but the wind. "Well, kid, looks like breakfast's gonna be late." The ring of warriors didn't part for many things, but when the old man on the white horse approached, the dust itself seemed to move aside. He wore no feathers, no painted symbols, no silver ornaments. Just a long buckskin robe the color of dry bone, and eyes like a hawk that had lived through too many winters. In his left hand, he carried a coiled whip. It wasn't drawn or brandished. It hung low against his saddle. The leather was blackened in places, and near the tip, dried blood flaked off in the morning light. Elias stood on the porch, arms crossed. He didn't reach for his rifle. He didn't need to. The man stopped 10 feet from the front gate. His voice, when it came, was calm, deep, as if carved from stone. "You sheltered the boy." Elias nodded once. He was starving. He's still a child. "He is my blood." That changed something. Not in Elias's face, but in the weight of the moment. Chief Taklashim let the whip drop gently across the horn of his saddle. Not threatening, just present. "The boy's name is Koa, my brother's son, chosen by the spirits before his second breath, marked to lead when I return to the soil." Elias looked at the whip again. "Is that why you came with that thing?" Chief Taklashim's gaze narrowed. "You see a weapon. I see a covenant." He gestured toward the whip, not with pride, but with finality. What was done to him was done under the eye of our ancestors. Each strike a prayer. Each welt a burden he must carry, if he is to carry the people. Elias didn't speak, didn't argue, because what do you say to a man who believes pain is prophecy? Chief Taklisham's eyes softened, not with pity, but with memory. He fled. He broke the circle. That cannot be ignored. He paused, but neither can kindness. The wind shifted. A hawk circled high overhead, casting a small, silent shadow on the hardpan. Chief Taklisham dismounted with the ease of someone who'd known a saddle longer than a bed. He walked slowly toward the gate, eyes steady. Elias didn't move. The chief stopped within arm's reach. He uncoiled the whip, not to raise it, but to hold it flat across both hands like something sacred. The corn he stole was not food. His voice was quieter now, not softer, but deeper, weighted. It is called the sacred fire corn. It grows only in the red basin where no shadow touches after sunrise. We burn it once a year, only once. It calls the spirits. It binds the tribe. He looked Elias in the eye. No child, no warrior, no chief may taste it outside the ritual. And he did. Elias's jaw tensed. He was starving. And he was chosen, Taklisham countered. When a chosen one breaks sacred law, the punishment is not vengeance, it is reminder. The flesh must carry what the soul must not forget. He ran a thumb over one welt on the leather. This whip was braided by my father's hands. It has only struck leaders. Elias stared at the old man. And you'd finish the job, would you? Taklisham's voice was still. If the boy had died under the ritual, we would have buried him with songs. But he fled, broke the circle. And now the spirits are watching what kind of man dares interrupt their will. A long silence passed between them. Then Taklisham reached into his robe and withdrew a small pouch. He dropped it at Elias's feet. It clinked, metal inside. Coins? No. Dried herbs, flint, a feather, medicine. You fed him, so now you carry a choice. He stepped back. At sundown I return, with fire or forgiveness, depending on what waits behind your door. Then he turned, and the Apache warriors parted like water around stone. All morning the silence held. Koa didn't wake until the sun was high. He blinked toward the rafters, then shot upright, panic flashing across his face. Elias sat at the table, sipping coffee that had long gone cold. I didn't take it to dishonor them, the boy said suddenly, like he'd been holding it back through 100 sleepless nights. I know, Elias replied without looking up. Koa's voice was barely audible. I was hungry, and it was glowing, like it was calling. Elias finally turned. You think the spirits called to you? Koa didn't answer, but the way he looked at the fire, like it might speak back, was answer enough. The afternoon passed slow and tight. Elias chopped wood, stacked provisions, loaded what ammo he had left. Koa helped where he could, but mostly watched the horizon. As the light began to bend westward, Elias stood on the porch again, this time with Koa beside him. 100 hooves stirred in unison. The Apache warriors straightened as one. Taklisham reappeared, alone once more. This time, Elias met him halfway. They stood between fence posts, no weapons, no raised voices. Just two men, weathered by time and dust and decisions no one wanted to make. I won't give him back, Elias said plainly. You admit the risk. I admit the boy's human. Taklisham's expression didn't shift. Elias pressed on. You think I don't understand ritual? I wore blue once, saw men shot for sleeping, hung for stealing bread. You want to talk about law? Fine. But this boy, he's not a symbol to me. He's a child with bruises older than his courage. Taklisham studied him for a long moment. Then, without a word, he pulled a bone disc from his pouch. It was carved with sun marks and 4 notches. 1 moon, he said. You will keep him for 1 full cycle. Elias blinked. Why? So he may learn your kind of strength. And you, Taklisham added, may learn what kind of weight our laws carry. He handed over the disc. Our warriors will leave, but the spirits will not. He turned to mount his horse. And know this, if he dies, by accident, by bullet, by spirit, we return, not with words. Elias nodded. Then I'll keep him breathing, even if it kills me. Taklisham gave one last look, neither warm nor cold. Then he rode off. The circle broke. Riders peeled away like mist off canyon walls. And for the first time that day, the wind moved again. For the first 2 days, they barely spoke. Koa kept to himself, sitting cross-legged near the barn or wandering the fence line like a ghost with no home. Elias didn't press. He'd seen wild horses spook if cornered too fast. This boy was no different, bruises fresh, pride raw. On the 3rd morning, Elias tossed a rope toward him. Ever throw a lasso? Koa stared, didn't touch it. Elias shrugged. Suit yourself. Fence post's not going to fix itself. He walked off, half expecting silence to be his only answer. But 20 paces later, he heard light footsteps in the dirt. Koa followed. That day, they fixed the western fence. The wind blew steady. Koa didn't speak, but he watched Elias's hands, studied how he looped wire and set posts. When a nail bent sideways, Elias muttered something under his breath. Koa grinned. It was the first crack in the stone. That night, they ate cornbread and beans again. Elias poured coffee. Koa poured silence. The boy didn't pray, didn't smile, just stared at the flickering lamplight like it might tell him something Elias never could. You always this quiet? Elias asked. Koa replied without looking up. Words are heavy. Elias nodded, took another sip. You'll fit in just fine around here. They sat in quiet for a long while, until a coyote yipped out near the ridge. Koa glanced toward the sound, eyes alert, body still. That coyote's hunting alone, the boy said softly. So? He's either very strong or very stupid. Elias chuckled. Maybe both. Koa didn't smile. He just nodded once, like the idea made sense. Later that night, as Elias lay on his cot, the boy's voice floated from the other side of the cabin. You were a soldier? Elias stared at the ceiling. Was. Did you win? A long pause. No. The days grew warmer. The land cracked open under the sun like an old scar. But between the canyon walls and the barn posts, something quieter began to shift. Elias was setting traps for rabbits, an old soldier's technique, tight wire and bait. But Koa shook his head. Rabbits learn. If you leave the scent of metal, they remember. Elias raised a brow. Didn't know they were philosophers. Koa knelt beside one of the traps, pulled out a bundle of sage from his satchel, the same herbs Taklisham had left behind. He burned a pinch, then waved the smoke over the trap. Now it smells like wind. The next morning, 2 rabbits waited in the snare. Elias whistled low. Damn. Koa only said, they trusted the scent. That evening, Elias brought out a battered old book, the Army Field Manual, 1872 edition, pages yellowed, dog-eared, filled with diagrams. He opened it to a map of the valley. Used to think I knew this place. Wind patterns, choke points, where the deer run in spring. Koa studied it a moment, then turned the book sideways. You're looking at it from above, but the land doesn't live above, it lives underneath. He took a stick, drew a line in the dirt beside the fire. Here, this dry gully, it turns to river at night if the north wind shifts. That's not on any map. The map listens to the army. The land listens to the stars. Elias looked at the boy, his hands dusty, eyes reflecting firelight, like he belonged to both the past and the future at once. That night, Elias dreamt of rivers under rock and stars that whispered things he no longer understood. When he woke, Koa was already outside, tracking something with bare feet, nose to the wind like a coyote. And for the first time in years, Elias didn't feel like the teacher. He felt like the student. By the third week, Elias had stopped counting days. He no longer checked the bone disk Taklisham gave him. The mornings blurred into tasks, and the nights ended in quiet conversation and shared bread. It wasn't peace, but it was enough. One afternoon, Koa climbed the barn's roof to fix a patch of missing shingles. Elias shouted from below, "Careful, you fall off that thing, and I'm not explaining it to a war chief." Koa grinned. "I'll land on my feet." "You're not a cat." "I'm better." He jumped from the last rafter, rolled in the dirt, came up laughing. Laughing, not the cautious smile or quiet nod, but a burst of joy like lightning splitting a storm. Elias stared. "That the first time you've laughed since you got here?" Koa wiped dust from his arms. "First time no one's hit me for it." The words landed harder than the boy meant. Elias turned away, cleared his throat. That evening they roasted rabbit over juniper fire. Koa leaned back against a hay bale, full and warm, and traced stars with a stick in the dirt. "That one," he said, pointing, "is the hunter's eye. If it blinks, it means rain." Elias nodded. "What's that one?" "The dog." "Looks more like a fish." Koa smirked. "That's why you keep walking in circles." They both laughed. Then silence. The fire popped once, like a warning. "They'll come for me," Koa whispered. "They said a month." "Not just them. The spirits, the law. It doesn't forget." Elias said nothing. Koa pulled his blanket tighter. "I'm not afraid of pain. I'm afraid of going back and them looking at me like I broke." His voice cracked. Elias looked at him long and slow. "You didn't break, kid. You bent. And then you grew stronger." Koa didn't answer. Later that night, long after Elias's snoring settled into rhythm, the boy sat awake, knees to chest, eyes wide open, listening. Not to coyotes, but to judgment. The first sign wasn't dust. It was silence. Not the heavy, sacred kind the Apache carried. This was different. Heavy like a storm front, like something pressing on the chest before thunder breaks bone. Elias heard it first. No bird song, no wind. Then came the hoofbeats. 20 men rode in hard from the north ridge. Dust clung to their coats, rifles across saddles, tin stars flashing sharp in the afternoon sun. At their head, a man with a silver beard and eyes like river ice. Marshal Silas Grady. He pulled up at the gate like he owned the dirt beneath it. Elias didn't move from the porch. "Afternoon, Marshal." This story's just getting started. If you're on the edge of your seat, hit that like button and subscribe to hear how Elias faces down a new threat. Grady chewed a matchstick. "Heard you've been harboring a little Apache spy." "He's 8. Age don't matter when it comes to treason." Grady's voice wasn't loud, but it carried. The men behind him fanned out, forming a loose semicircle, eerily familiar, but colder than the Apache's stillness. "Town council's uneasy, Whitaker. Word is you're protecting a future raider. That true?" Elias didn't answer. Grady dismounted, slow and deliberate. "You're a soldier, ain't ya? You know how this works. Harboring enemies makes you one." "He's a child, not an enemy." Grady's smile didn't reach his eyes. That's where you're wrong. Children grow teeth, especially his kind. Koa stepped out from the side of the house. Just a glimpse, just enough. The reaction was immediate. One of the men raised his rifle. Grady held up a hand, calm, commanding. We ain't animals.
Not yet. He turned back to Elias. You've got 24 hours to surrender him. After that, we'll come collect. He tipped his hat, but the gesture felt more like a funeral than a farewell. As they rode off, dust rose behind them, not free like Apache dust, but choking. And Elias knew this storm wouldn't wait for spirits to decide. That night, Elias couldn't sleep, not from the desert heat or coyote howls, but from the weight. He sat on the porch, boots planted, rifle across his lap. The stars felt farther away than usual, cold pinpricks against a sky that offered no mercy. Koa stepped out barefoot. He didn't speak, just stood beside Elias in the moonlight. They'll come, the boy said. Elias nodded. I can go, Koa whispered. That made Elias look hard. Slip out before sunrise, follow the ridge. I know how to move without tracks. If I leave, they won't burn your ranch. Elias didn't answer. Koa sat beside him. This land matters to you, more than me. Elias turned slowly. Don't say that. It's true. No, Elias said, firmer now. It's not. He stared ahead, jaw tight. I've seen men die for flags, for lies dressed up in uniforms. I ain't about to let a kid, my guest, walk out to save face for cowards with badges. Koa's voice cracked. But they'll kill you. Elias met his eyes. Then I'll die tired and honest. They sat in silence again, broken only by a distant owl and the faint clink of Elias reloading. When I was your age, Elias said slowly, I watched a man hang for stealing salt. No trial, no mercy, just a tree and a rope. He looked at Koa. No one stood for him. I've lived with that ever since. Koa's eyes watered. Why now? Elias exhaled. Because when I gave you that bread, you looked at it like it was the first kindness you'd ever seen. And I'll be damned if the last thing you see is cruelty. He reached over, placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. You're not Apache. You're not white. You're mine now. That means something. Koa swallowed hard. The wind picked up, and this time it didn't carry judgment. It carried a warning. The sun had barely dipped below the jagged horizon of Dustwater Valley when the firelight came. Flickering torches bobbing like angry stars, crawling over the ridge toward Whisper Rock Ranch. Elias stood alone on the porch, lantern low, rifle in hand, hat shadowing his eyes. Beside him, the boy stood silent, fists clenched at his sides. Marshal Grady rode at the front, dust trailing behind him like smoke from a fuse. His voice cut through the desert night like a blade on rawhide. 1 minute, Whitaker. That's all you get. Elias didn't flinch. Grady raised his torch higher. 1 minute to hand over the half-breed, or I'll burn this ranch down with both of you in it. You think legends make you bulletproof? Think again. The torchlight multiplied behind him. Dozens of men, guns ready, faces grim. Koa stood tall but trembling. Elias laid a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. Get inside. I'm not hiding. I'm not asking. Koa hesitated, then obeyed. Elias turned back, cocked his rifle once, loud, deliberate. You've made your threat. Now you better be damn sure you're ready to live with what comes after. Grady sneered. A soldier's pride won't stop bullets. Maybe not, Elias said, "but truth will haunt the men who fire them." He stepped off the porch, rifle at his side, but barrel down. "This ain't justice, Marshal. It's vengeance wrapped in law. Call it what you want. I call it cleaning up a threat." Elias stared at him. "He's a child. He's a spark, and sparks burn towns." The second hand on Elias's watch ticked loud in his ear. 18 bullets, that's all he had left, and one spine made of iron. Then come and get him. The torches paused, the wind stilled, and the moment stretched, like a hammer about to fall. A single voice cut through the silence like a gunshot through glass. "Hold your fire." Grady's torch wavered. Men turned. Dust swirled at the edge of the canyon road, and from its heart emerged 5 riders, lanterns swinging, hooves pounding steady like judgment. At the front rode Sheriff Amos Rourke, gray coat open, badge glinting gold beneath torchlight, jaw set like granite. "Marshal Grady," he barked, "stand down." Grady's lip curled. "This isn't your jurisdiction, Rourke." "Tonight it is." He dismounted and pulled a folded document from his coat, holding it high. "Territorial Office, signed by Governor Harmon himself. The boy, Koa, is under federal protection. He's a named ward in the Treaty of Dry Winds." A murmur swept through the men behind Grady. Some lowered their guns. Others looked to Grady, confused. Grady didn't move. "You bring politics to a firefight?" he spat. Rourke stepped forward. "No, Silas, I bring law, the real kind, not the one you twist when it suits your gut." Grady's jaw flexed. "That boy's a threat. So is lighting a ranch on fire over a rumor." Rourke turned, addressed the crowd. "You all came here thinking this was justice. It's not. It's a lynching, dressed up in fear." He pointed to the paper. "You burn this land tonight, and you burn your names into history the wrong way." Slowly, torches began to lower. A few boots shuffled. The circle broke, not entirely, but just enough. Grady stared at Elias. "This isn't over." "It never is," Elias said. But for now, the guns didn't fire. The match stayed unlit, and the wind carried only the sound of retreating hooves. The torches had barely dimmed when the drums began. Not war drums, not yet, but low, steady, ancient, a heartbeat older than this land's name. Rourke turned sharply. Elias didn't move. He'd heard that rhythm before. So had Koa. At the far ridge, beyond Grady's broken circle of men, ghosts appeared. 50 Apache warriors, lit by the orange cast of moon and fire, emerged like shadows solidifying from wind. Silent, motionless. Their faces painted with ash and ochre, their horses barely twitching beneath them. At the center, on a horse of midnight black, rode Chief Tucklesham. But this time he wore the full mantle of his station, the ceremonial feathers, the sun-beaten robe of his ancestors, and the war staff tipped with obsidian. No whip, no words, only eyes that burned like coals as they scanned the scene. He took in Grady's armed men, the lowered torches, the rifles still warm in trembling hands. He saw Elias, and behind him, Koa. The boy stepped forward before Elias could stop him. The Apache warriors tensed. Grady muttered, "You've got to be kidding me." Rourke whispered, "Not another word." Tucklesham rode 5 paces closer, his warriors following like a tide of judgment. He raised one hand, not in greeting, not in warning, but in a gesture older than treaties. A gesture that said, "We came for our own. You failed to protect him." And from the edge of the night, dozens more shadows moved.
The ridge behind Elias's ranch now glowed with torchlight, a third front. Apache to the east, Grady's men to the west, Rourke in the middle, and Elias Whitaker at the eye of a war storm waiting to break. Koa stepped forward again, but this time Tuklisham raised his hand sharply, the kind of motion that once stopped entire war parties mid-gallop. The boy froze. A war is brewing, and a child holds the key. Do you think Koa's words can truly change the course of history? Drop your predictions in the comments, and don't miss the powerful conclusion to this incredible tale. The air was still as glass, the kind of stillness that knew the weight of history. Tuklisham's voice rose, not in anger, not yet, but in a tone that echoed both judgment and heartbreak. You said he was safe. Elias didn't answer. The chief looked past him, to the torched ground, to the scattered footprints, to the torn soil where men had stood ready to burn a child for peace of mind. You said he would learn your ways. Now Elias spoke.
And he has. But your warriors see only what almost happened, not what was stopped. Tuklisham turned to Rourke. You bring law, yet your men carry fire. Rourke nodded slowly. Not all of us came to burn. Grady snorted. They trespassed. I acted. Koa's voice cut through the tension like a crack of thunder. You lied. All heads turned. Koa stepped fully into the firelight now, no longer the scared boy on Elias's porch, but something steadier. You said I was a danger, but it was you who came with fire. Grady reached for his holster, and instantly dozens of bows rose from Apache hands. Elias shouted, "Don't!" Rourke drew his weapon, but held it pointed low. Silas, stand down. Tuklisham remained still. His warriors did not. Neither did Grady's men. It was seconds, no fractions of seconds, from the valley exploding into blood and gunpowder. Elias felt Koa's breath beside him. The boy whispered, "Let me speak." And Elias, after a long moment, nodded. "Then speak true." Koa took one breath, then another, and then he stepped forward, past Elias, past Rourke, even past the line of Apache warriors, into the firelight. No shield, no translation, no adult hand to catch him if he faltered. I will speak for myself now. His voice was not loud, but the silence it carved was deeper than any rifle crack. I am Little Wolf, nephew of Chief Standing Bear, son of Smoke and Wind, who died with honor. I was chosen by Dream and Drum to carry the name of my ancestors. Grady scoffed, but no one moved. I stole the sacred fire corn. I do not deny it. Gasps. Some Apache warriors shifted. Even Tuklisham's brow furrowed. Koa continued, I was hungry, not in my stomach, but in my heart. I did not understand why tradition asked me to starve while others feasted on power. He looked at Tuklisham directly. You punished me, not with anger, but with sacred right. I understand that now. I do not hate you for it. Then he turned to the townspeople behind Rourke.
Men who just hours before had nearly lit the night sky with his name. And you feared me because you do not know me. His eyes locked with Marshal Grady's. You called me a spark, but so is every match before it lights a fire. Then he walked slowly toward the center, where 3 torches still burned in a triangle of tension. I lived with Elias Whitaker, a man who could have handed me over, but didn't. He taught me to mend fences, to speak your tongue, to ride without fear. He looked back at Tuklisham, and I taught him how to listen to wind, how to see the signs in dust, how to kneel without losing honor. Now Koa stood with a torch in hand, looking at all three factions, and he raised it high. If blood must be spilled tonight, let it begin with mine. I will not run, I will not hide, but I will not be used. The wind caught Koa's words and scattered them like embers across the circle of men and warriors. No one moved. Even the horses stilled. Even the flames bent toward him. Koa lowered the torch, placed it gently into the dust, upright, unburned, like a truce waiting to be accepted. Then he spoke again, softer now, but no less firm. I was born between two drums, the drum of ceremony and the drum of gunfire. I am both. He turned to Grady. You fear what you do not understand, but fear is not strength. It's the enemy of strength. To Rourke, you brought paper, that's law, but Elias brought bread, that's mercy, and we need both. And finally to Taklishim, you taught me that a leader does not hide behind silence, so tonight I speak, not as child, not as prisoner, but as little wolf. He turned slowly, his voice steady now, unshakable. I do not want blood. I want something harder. I want peace. A murmur rolled through the Apache line. An older warrior lowered his bow, then another and another, until only Taklishim remained still, eyes narrowed, not yet moved, but no longer rigid. I do not want blood. I want something harder. I want peace. A murmur rolled through the Apache line. An older warrior lowered his bow, then another and another, until only Taklishim remained still, eyes narrowed, not yet moved, but no longer rigid.
Grady's men looked lost, half of them shifting awkwardly, unsure whether to retreat or wait. Grady himself barked, "You're just a boy. You think words change men?" Koa looked at him, calmly. "No, I think choosing not to shoot changes men." Rourke stepped forward, hat in hand. His voice cracked with something he hadn't let anyone hear in years. "I believe him." He turned to his men. "Lower your weapons, all of them." The rifles clattered like thunder receding. Elias placed a hand on Koa's shoulder, not to protect, not to guide, but simply to stand beside. Then, without signal or order, Taklishim dismounted. He walked, slow, silent, to where the torch stood in the earth. He looked at Koa, at Elias, at the embers in the boy's eyes, and he said only one word: "Accepted." Silence. And then, boots in the dust. It was Sheriff Amos Rourke who stepped forward first, toward Grady, toward the man whose voice had nearly lit the valley in flames. His face wasn't angry, it was resolved. "Marshal Grady," he said, voice even, carrying across the firelit circle, "you are hereby under arrest for inciting armed conflict, violating territorial treaty law, and the attempted unlawful detainment of a protected minor." Grady blinked, laughed. "You've gone soft, Rourke. Arrest me? After what that boy admitted?" Elias spoke next, calm and cold. He admitted hunger, not treason. "And you," he gestured to the charred grass, the dropped rifles, the bloodlust still echoing in the night air. "You admitted everything with a torch in your hand." Grady looked around, but the eyes that met his now were no longer filled with loyalty. His men, those who hadn't already lowered their rifles, were backing away. Some dropped their hats, others looked at the ground. Even the torchlight seemed to shrink from him. Rourke stepped closer, hand on his holster, but not yet drawn. "You can go peacefully, or I'll drag you in front of the territorial court myself." For a moment, Grady's hand twitched toward his belt, and then a shadow fell over him. Taklashim. The chief hadn't spoken since his one-word judgment. Now he looked at Grady as if seeing something long decayed. "You do not fight for law," he said, his English thick but unmistakably clear. "You fight for fire, and fire forgets who it burns." Grady spat into the dirt, but his eyes no longer held defiance, only emptiness. He dropped his belt. The pistol thudded dully in the sand, and then, as if his spine had given up before his pride, he knelt. Sheriff Rourke stepped forward and pulled Grady to his feet, rough but not cruel. He clicked the irons around Grady's wrists with a finality that echoed across the silent field. "You'll stand trial in Santa Fe. Maybe you'll find the law you claim to carry." Grady didn't respond, didn't fight, didn't look anyone in the eye. 2 deputies moved in, flanking him on either side. One of them, the youngest, stole a glance at Koa, eyes wide, face unreadable. Rourke turned to Elias and nodded. "Your testimony will be needed, so will the boys. This isn't over, but tonight it's ended." Taklashim remained still, watching everything. Then, slowly, he approached Koa once more, no longer as judge, but as something else. He knelt, an act unthinkable for most chiefs, and reached into the leather pouch at his side. From it, he pulled a white feather, bound in sinew and streaked with red ochre. He placed it in Koa's hand. "You walked through fire," he said softly, "and you did not become ash." Koa's hand trembled as he took it, but he didn't cry. He only nodded. Elias stepped beside them, not saying a word, but placing one calloused hand on the boy's shoulder. And that was enough. Around them, the Apache warriors began to mount their horses in silence. One by one, without signal or command, they turned and rode out, like ghosts into the dusk, the last torchlight catching on the feathers in their hair. Grady, shackled, was led in the opposite direction, down the long road to Fort Laramie, flanked by the law he had twisted for so long. The war didn't come, because one boy chose to speak, because one man chose mercy over safety, because the truth was finally louder than the fear. And in that silence, a new story began. The morning sun rose soft and slow over Dustwater Valley, casting long gold lines across the porch of Whisper Rock Ranch. The fire was out. The war had passed. But something sacred still hung in the air. Not silence, but stillness. Koa stood by the fence, his satchel slung over his shoulder, moccasins dusted with the earth he had come to know. He looked taller now, not in height but in presence. The boy who had once flinched at the sound of footfall now stood unshaken, his eyes steady as the horizon. Elias approached without a word. Koa turned. "Will I ever see this place again?" he asked quietly. Elias took a breath, not to answer, but to feel the weight of the moment. Then he nodded. "I think you already carry it with you." There was a beat of silence. Then Koa stepped forward, sudden, certain, and wrapped his arms around Elias's middle. The hug was fierce, boyish, and final. "You are my white brother," Koa whispered, "no matter what the world calls us." Elias swallowed hard. His hand found the boy's back, not to hold, but to honor. From behind them, Chief Taklishim approached, walking slow like the wind knew his name. His eyes carried centuries. His hands held a small leather bundle. "This," he said, offering it to Elias, "is for you." Inside, Elias found no coin, no map, no tool of war. Only 3 things: a feather of the desert hawk, a red river stone polished by time, and a sprig of dried white sage.
The feather is for vision, Tucklesham said. The stone for memory. The sage
to remind you that peace must be tended like fire. Elias said nothing, but when their eyes met, there was no need. Koa mounted the horse the townspeople had gifted him, a young, strong gelding with a black blaze and a soft step. He gave Elias one last look, then nudged the horse west into the rising sun. The boy rode away, but something stayed behind. Not his shadow, not his scent, something else. A bond, a vow, a path that now belonged to both of them, the path between two worlds. The wind still came through Dustwater Valley the same way it always had, dry, warm, whispering secrets through the sagebrush. But everything else had changed. Whisper Rock Ranch had grown quieter and somehow fuller. The barn roof was mended. A new chicken coop stood where the old goat pen used to be. But it wasn't the repairs that made the difference. It was the visitors. Every week riders came. Some wore worn Stetsons, others wore eagle feathers. But none came with rifles raised. They came to trade, to talk, to listen. Elias Whitaker's ranch had become the first neutral ground in the region, where white settlers and Apache families could meet without fear, under the unspoken truce born not from treaties, but from a boy and a piece of bread. One morning, as Elias sat on the porch with a coffee mug stained by years of use, a letter arrived. The envelope bore no stamp, just a symbol, a painted feather and a stone. Inside was a single sheet of parchment, written in English and Apache. The words were careful, the handwriting unsure. But Elias knew who it was from before he read the first line. I have been accepted by the council elders. My punishment is lifted. I am now a student of the way. They call me Little Wolf with pride now. And when they ask me what gave me strength, I say it was you, and the desert, and the silence of your ranch. One day, if the winds allow it, I will return. Not as a child, but as a chief. Elias folded the letter with care, tucked it into the inside pocket of his old cavalry coat, and stared out across the fields. There, in the distance, he saw two young boys, one Apache, one white, racing through the tall grass, chasing the same lizard, laughing the same laugh. He smiled. It hadn't taken a war to change the West. Just one hungry child, one piece of bread, and the courage to see past old wounds. Evenings came softer now. The coyotes still howled, the wind still wandered the canyon, but something in Dustwater Valley had settled, not into silence, but into understanding. Elias Whitaker sat on his porch, boots up on the rail, old rifle leaning beside the door, not for defense, but for memory. The world hadn't made him rich, not in gold, not in land, but in something rarer, peace. A tobacco pipe hung loosely in his fingers, unlit. He didn't need smoke tonight. The stars were bright enough. From the distance he could hear it, the drums, low, rhythmic, ancient. They came from the western ridge, where the Apache still held their moon ceremonies. Once a sound that had stirred fear in settlers, it now carried something different to Elias's ears, belonging. He closed his eyes and listened, not just to the drums, but to the layers beneath. A horse's hoof brushing gravel, a kettle boiling inside, a faint chuckle from the barn, someone telling a joke in broken English and Apache. Life. Behind him, inside the ranch house, hung a small leather pouch, the gift from Tucklesham, and below it, pinned to the wall, a single letter, Koa's words, Little Wolf's promise. Sometimes travelers asked Elias why he never left, why he didn't go back east or sell the land and rest somewhere greener. Life. Behind him, inside the ranch house, hung a small leather pouch, the gift from Tucklesham, and below it, pinned to the wall, a single letter, Koa's words, Little Wolf's promise.
Sometimes travelers asked Elias why he never left, why he didn't go back east or sell the land and rest somewhere greener.
He'd always answer the same way. I've already seen the most important place a man can see, the inside of someone else's heart. And when the wind howled across Dustwater Valley at night, Elias would smile, remembering a boy, a piece of bread, and a war that never happened. You know, maybe it was never about the war. Not about who had more guns, not about borders, bloodlines, or ancient wrongs. Maybe it was always about one man, seeing a hungry boy and choosing to share his last piece of bread. Out here in the West, they said survival belonged to the strongest. But sometimes survival belongs to the kindest. Elias Whitaker didn't ride into town with a posse. He didn't win with a gunfight. He just opened his door, listened to the wind, and said, "Not this time." And that choice, to stand still when everything else screamed run, changed not just one life, but the lives of everyone watching. Because when one person chooses compassion over fear, it echoes. Koa became more than just a boy running from punishment. He found his voice. He found his future. And maybe, through him, the valley found its peace too. And you, maybe you're not in the desert. Maybe you're not standing between two nations on the edge of war. But maybe there's someone in your life, someone small, quiet, overlooked, who just needs you to stop, to listen, to share something simple, like bread, like time, like belief. The Wild West wasn't just guns and dust. It was full of choices like that, simple but sacred. And that's why we tell these stories. Because sometimes we don't need new heroes. We just need to remember the quiet ones. If this story stayed with you, if it made you look at kindness a little different, stick around. There's more where this came from. More true Wild West stories, real people, real choices, and the kind of courage that never needed a gun.